Do you know that great German word, Weltschmerz? Well, today, as I sit in front of my computer to record these few minutes, I harbor a sense of Weltschmerz, a feeling of melancholy, of world weariness. It's all bad news surrounding us. Here in the UK, the death of the Queen has released reservoirs of affection, but also of grief. The Russia-Ukraine war that worries me immensely in terms of the awful casualties and the damage, but also the lingering fear that this war could graduate into a use of tactical nuclear weapons. And then for me as an Armenian, whose spiritual homeland lies in that tiny republic in the South Caucasus, I worry about the horrible bellicose incidents that are menacingly taking place on the borders of Armenia with Azerbaijan. And so today, in this number 33 of Intuitive Reactions on Nagorno-Karabakh and Armenian Matters, I share with you briefly the human suffering of the ongoing conflict in a political pentagon that involves Azerbaijan, Armenia, Nagorno-Karabakh, Turkey, and Russia, and of course, other players and countries. Now, the latest war chapter few days ago that lasted only 2 or 3 days in places like Sotk, like Jermuk and others, resulted in destruction that is visible. From an Armenian perspective, some 10 square kilometers of territory within the Republic of Armenia were captured, occupied by Azerbaijan. Over 2,500 Armenian civilians were displaced from their homes. Almost 200 houses in towns and villages along the borderline were damaged in the shelling, and some 7,000 to 8,000 people have been displaced from their homes. Now, in the description box today, I'll put a short paragraph by Olesya Vartanian of Crisis Group on this escalation in hostilities since the 40-day war, the devastating war of 2020. Now, I have a lot of time for Olesya's analyses, and so I also introduce her briefly to you today. But on this Sunday, the 18th of September, I'd also like to refer you to an awareness and unity vigil that took place at St. Sarkis a couple of evenings ago. Now, I'm not too fond of such vigils, particularly when they're not well organized. But there are 2 items that really spoke to me. The first one, and I've shared this with you in the past, was the singing of the Der Voromia in Armenian, Lord have mercy, that always overwhelms me with its haunting words and haunting music. And then there was the short talk of solidarity with Archbishop Angelos of the Coptic Orthodox Church, who also offered words, sincere words of standing with Armenians in their difficult moments. But put those together and put the idea of a vigil together, and you get a moment of solemnity, a moment where you sit down, you kneel down, you stand up, and you think of the significance of what has been happening in ways that affect you personally and a lot of other people too. So flowing from this event, I'd personally like to invite you today briefly to consider some words uttered many, many decades ago by Martin Luther King Jr. Now, he was a Baptist minister who was assassinated in 1968. And of course, when I say I have a dream, that was delivered on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in 1963 in Washington, D.C., I think you'd immediately realize whom I'm talking about. But Martin Luther King Jr. was much more than that. And I have spent some time years ago reading about him, discussing his ministry and his non-violent protest movement in the United States. So today, I'd like to share with you just 3 quotations from this wonderful man whose life was cut short so dramatically and cruelly in 1968. The first one, he said once, "We have guided missiles and misguided men." Just think of those quotations. That's all I'm inviting you to do today. My episodes are not exercises in diplomacy. They're just food for thought. We have guided missiles and misguided men. So I don't want to dwell on the Collective Security Treaty Organization, the CSTO. That's a military alliance, a clone of NATO, if you will, that was set up by Russia and Eurasia with 6 post-Soviet states, Armenia being one of them. It failed miserably in its mandate. I also don't want to refer to the OSCE Minsk group, which has labored over so many years, but has not really produced much in terms of resolving this conflict. So all I'm going to say in relation to this quotation is that guided missiles wreak destruction, but those who trigger those missiles are misguided men. And so today, in my own simple, humble, modest way, I call for those misguided men to apply the principles of conflict resolution, alternative dispute resolution, to find a way of resolving this conflict. Don't use temporary band-aids, but real measures to promote goodwill, which would then discover means of resolving a conflict and enhancing security. The second quotation I would like to share with you from Martin Luther King Jr. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. This one is very, very powerful for me personally, because in all my life, I've always sort of said, I'm not going to shut up. I'm not going to stay stumm. I'm not going to turn the other way just because I'm afraid, or I don't want to, or I don't think that it would make a blind bit of difference what I say or don't say. No, we all have to do our bit and to be vocal when we see injustice. Our lives begin, MLK Jr. said, they begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. So I called the United States on this quotation. After all, the Baptist minister was from the United States. Nancy Pelosi was in Armenia yesterday, and she said that the United States will never turn its back on Armenia. But what does that mean in real terms? Is it the same as an awareness and unity vigil? You get together, you say the nice words, and then you go out feeling satisfied, perhaps even smug that you've said something? Or is there more relevance, more power, in a good sense, behind those words? Then what about the EU, the European Union? I mean, Charles Michel and others are doing a lot to try and bring people together. They should continue their efforts. The EU will not be able to resolve this conflict. The EU will only be able to facilitate the parties coming together, offer its good offices to bring those parties together in order for them to find a solution. And in so doing, the EU should also be careful not to be seen as sort of tilting one way or another because there is a gas and oil deal here or a geostrategic advantage there. And of course, Turkey, which stands behind Azerbaijan with all its support, should also stop playing Ottoman-like games or neo-Ottoman-like games, and its president should try sincerely to find a way to resolve the conflict with Armenia and its attendant consequences, opening of borders, etc., and to try and fold this aggressive chapter. And there, I also offer you to think, to mull over. That's all this episode does, food for thought, about Iran. Iran is a neighbor of Armenia. And it's a very important neighbor of Armenia that the Armenian Foreign Ministry and Armenians haven't yet reckoned how important it is, because they're perhaps a little bit worried about the sanctions that might hit Armenia as well if there is more cooperation with Iran. But Iran is a neighbor. Don't forget that. We're talking about a geography that is thousands of miles away from Europe and the United States. And finally, the third quotation I would use today is one that also is quite powerful for me. Wars are poor chisels for carving out peaceful tomorrows. And this quotation by Martin Luther King Jr. is one of the essential components of conflict resolution. How do we stop testosterone-driven proclivities that some politicians exhibit in order to find the ways and the means to resolve conflicts? Please just think of those three quotations. If you can't think of anything else, just think of what this man said. And he lost his life. He gave his life for the sake of this and many other quotations as he sought his dream. Just think of it. And then ask with me the simple question, so what will happen tomorrow? And in order to define what will happen tomorrow, I'm not going to give you my words. I'm going to use the late Queen Elizabeth II's words from many, many years ago when she was much younger. She said then, and it applies so much today as well. She said, and I quote, "It has sometimes been observed that what leaders do for their people today is government and politics. But what they do for the people of tomorrow, that is statesmanship." Indeed. Very wise words from a wonderful woman. Indeed, tomorrow needs a strategy. Tomorrow doesn't need just words and prayers. Tomorrow shouldn't only bring forth this Weltschmerz that I feel either.